Welcome to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. This is the place to learn how to get through your worst rock bottom and start to embrace adversity. I'm your host, Petra Belzebor. I'm a therapist and a life coach, but my biggest learning is from my own rock bottom. My story includes being raised in a cult, dealing with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and alcoholism. But along the way, I've learned to turn my entire life around to one of success, joy, and fulfillment. So in this podcast, I'll be talking to people from all walks of life who have done the same. I'll be teasing out the skills and tools necessary, as well as using my own experience to teach you how to turn your adversity into your biggest advantage. Welcome, everyone, to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very excited. We've got Nick Elvery on the line. He is a peak performance coach who turns entrepreneurs into superhuman productivity machines. That sounds like a great intro. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you, Petra. Thanks ever so much for having me on.
So exciting to have you on. Now, I always say to people that I happen to interview the person that I most need to learn from on that day. It's a bizarre thing. It just sort of happens. And I'm reading your sort of intro there about entrepreneurs into superhuman productivity machines. And yesterday was the last day at my day job. Completely. So wow. I jumped in with both feet fully into the entrepreneur scene. So I'm very excited about this conversation. Fill in some of the blanks for us. What are you most passionate about at the moment in life, work?
So my main passion is figuring out what makes human beings tick. And that's been a passion of mine since I was quite young, probably around 15 or 16 when I first started reading Tony Robbins' books, like a lot of people do at that sort of time. And
I'm not sure many people read him at 15, though. That's quite young.
Maybe not, but
yeah.
I think a lot of people do start with Tony's work when they start on that journey,
sure.
Or at least it's been part of their journey.
Absolutely.
And so for me, it's really, I'm just fascinated by the human experience. I'm fascinated by why we do things, and almost more importantly, why we don't do things a lot of the time. And that for me has been, as I say, a passion for a long, long time. And it's been, I sort of view myself and my life as one big experiment, or lots of different experiments. And through experimenting on myself and finding out what works for me, enables me to really have a much greater understanding of when I work with my clients and helping them. And obviously going through the journey of from addiction as well, which we'll obviously get into in this podcast, has given me a different way of looking at things from, say, most people or a lot of people. And yeah, I suppose I'm passionate just about why humans do or don't do things, and what strategies, tools, and things we can put in place to actually make our life easier and ultimately get the results that we want.
Absolutely. And I love your perspective about how we experiment with different things. Just that perspective on life can be so refreshing, rather than this is the set way of doing things, sort of a right or wrong. It's like, hey, let me experiment with what I'm learning, with what other people are showing me, and what I think might support, my life experience. So give us some context just to your history. What was your childhood like? Brothers, sisters? I mean, do you think your parents or the education system kind of prepared you for the real world? I guess if they were giving you Tony Robbins books at 15, then maybe they did. But give us a bit of context.
My parents weren't really involved in sort of handing me the knowledge from Tony Robbins. It was more of a sort of personal fascination rather than anything else.
Yeah.
To answer your question around whether I think education and parents give you everything you need to learn about life, I don't know if it's even possible. I mean, I definitely think the education system it's got a long way to go with regards to teaching us actually what is useful in life. Just simply, we're not really educated around the important things, like how to sleep properly, how to deal with stress, and why meditation is important, and nutrition, and all these things that I preach and teach on a daily basis. I would suggest that I would say that maybe where I came from has all been from reading books, and I'm an all-in type of guy. So when I get interested in a subject, I dive deep. I'm sort of guy who would listen to 4-hour podcast on one particular subject and really get interested in that subject. So my education, if you like, has been self-taught in a lot of ways. to give you some of the backstory about where I've come from, is my childhood was a very, very normal childhood in a lot of ways. Very loving family, great relationship with my parents, and there wasn't anything we didn't have any major hardships, in this traditional sense of the meaning. What I have experienced throughout my life is early on, from about 15 or 16, interestingly, the same time as I started picking up self-development books, was getting involved with drugs and alcohol at quite a young age. I started drinking when I was about 12, 13, and back in those days, going to pubs at that sort of age with a fake ID was very, very straightforward. So it started off that way, and basically just tailed off and got worse and worse over the years, and eventually I spent over a decade effectively addicted to hard drugs and alcohol, ending up with using crystal meth in Cambodia on my own, and going to very dark places and very lonely places. And alongside that, having watched my father decline and then eventually pass away with MS throughout my life, and when I was younger it didn't really affect him or the family, but as we grew up it became much more apparent, and that illness slowly takes your dignity away from you and strips your all humanity and human functions away from you, and you have to be looked after by other people. So that was the two major things that were going on in my life, watching my dad, who I loved dearly, decline through his life, and going from someone who was incredible, just an amazing man, to watching him not be able to fend for himself, and then alongside going through the experiences I did with drugs and alcohol. And it's been an interesting life, and it's been about 6 years that I've been free from drugs and alcohol now completely, and about the same sort of time as that my dad passed away, which is an interesting duality, if you like, between those two. But we can get more into that, I'm sure.
Sure. So I knew the story would be interesting. I'm 9 years sober, right? So that's alcohol specifically. Thank you. Is very personal story for me. So I completely understand the isolation and the trauma that can be self-inflicted, but no less real than if it was inflicted from the outside. Now, for people who don't maybe understand addiction, people often ask, well, why did you turn to that? There must be sort of a reason rather than maybe just a genetic thing. Did it coincide with your dad's decline? Were you trying to escape from difficult emotions within drugs and alcohol? Because you're talking about a really good childhood. So talk us through what led you down that path.
So what led me down that path was the classic smoking a cigarette with friends, and it was very much a sort of ego-driven environment of, let's showing try off. This, showing off, and that has always been a theme throughout. So it didn't start with coinciding with what my dad was going through, but what my dad was going through as I grew up definitely became a part of it, i.e. adding to the escapism that the drugs provided for me, and ultimately it was a big that was a big part of it, just being able to escape from life. There's no better way of being able to escape from life than doing a lot of drugs and drinking a lot of alcohol. So I think that they ran in tandem, maybe not right from the beginning. But I interviewed someone recently on my podcast, and we were talking about addiction because he's an addiction specialist as well, and the similarities sort of came through, and those similarities were the ego-driven showing off, being the class clown, which I always was, came into the picture quite readily from the beginning, and I think that was more the catalyst for driving me to be the one that could do the most and be seen to be, the best at taking drugs effectively.
Ironically, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it started there, and as my dad sort of grew, his illness got worse and worse, then I think that definitely played a part in cementing it, sort of keeping it going, if you like.
And did you have siblings? What was your relationship like with your mom? Like, were there other support networks or places you could go if things were difficult to talk things through, or was that not sort of part of your conditioning maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I was always a very closed book. The idea of sharing any information about my past, I mean, having a conversation on a podcast that's going to be broadcast across the world would have never even entered my mind.
Of course not.
So I was always a very closed book, and to the point where the first time I went to rehab, I spent 12 weeks and I didn't say a single word in any of our sessions. I just refused to speak about anything that was close to me. So to answer your question, support mechanisms and networks, not really. I didn't really ever share anything. It was, I just lived my life separately from my family. When it came to the drug side of things, and just never spoke to anyone about it. For all intents and purposes, life was great.
Well, and it is the most wonderful escape for a little while there, the illusion of belonging and fitting in and, being somebody, even if it is the class clown or whatever it might be, is so intoxicating. And then it's sort of gradual that it becomes more of a problem. So at what point, because I'm picturing the kid who's got a Tony Robbins book around the age of 15, right? But at the same time, and sort of paradoxically, is having that first cigarette and is, well into drinking drugs and that sort of thing. So how are those two maybe coinciding? And at what point did you realize that this might be a problem?
It is an interesting parallel because, as I say, I've had this interest in the human experience, nutrition, and everything that makes up a human being for a very long time. And at the same time, I've had this fascination or indulgence into the destructive nature of humanity as well, like where you can really take yourself, what dark places you can take yourself, both physically and mentally. So it is an interesting parallel between the two, where the interest for how the human works came from. I don't know. I think it's just the experiences I've had in life and my genetics, my makeup, like whatever, however humans are built, we all have our sort of passions and interests around certain things. So it's definitely an interesting parallel, and
it's kind of two sides of the same coin, I guess. It's like experimenting on yourself and going, what is it that other people do with their minds and bodies that allow them to live maybe a different life?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost polar opposites in a way. And I'm very grateful for having both experiences. It's taken me a little while to get to that.
I can imagine.
Being able to say that. But ultimately, I feel like in a lot of ways I've been put on this planet to go through this experience to be able to help other people. And not necessarily help people just to get off with drugs, but helping people be able to perform at a better level, which is obviously what I do with my coaching, and being able to see where it can lead from a negative side and what can be possible from a positive side. It's given me a really nice combination, if you like. And I completely resonate with that with me, but I also know that in the dark places, there is no fucking way that you would think that there was any purpose to the darkness that you're in, right? Or the gutter that you're in, or the random stranger's house that you're in, or there seems to be no purpose. And I know for me there was definitely a huge sort of victim mentality of the world has done to me, and therefore I have every right to, and I'm justified in this sort of behavior. And then only realizing when, I was in danger several times or the sort of rock bottoms, that kind of thing, that, oh shit, is this how I want the rest of my life to be? So a real story of adversity to advantage, which of course is the theme of the podcast. I imagine you relate to the terminology around rock bottom or crashes in some way. Have you had some of those? How dark did it get for you? Yeah, I've had quite a few.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, one? I've had about 82.
Yeah, I mean, they've all come in different forms and guises.
Sure.
I suppose one of the biggest was when I was in Cambodia. I spent three and a bit months out in Cambodia, and I went out there on my own traveling, and that got quite dark with respects to starting to do drugs that I'd never done before, like crystal meth, and hanging around with people that were dealing those sorts of drugs. It just it could have gone very, very badly. Like, that was a big turning point for me, and it was only the fact that I ran out of money and I had to come home that ended in the way it did, because it quite possibly could have gone down a very different route. But with regards to other times, it's the main thing is the internal dialogue, right? So what one thinks of oneself, what I was thinking about, who I was, what I was worth. Self-worth was just out of the window completely. There were points where I thought I was going mad. I mean, doing the amount of drugs that I did, psychosis is a very real thing.
Yeah.
And there have been lots and lots of times when I've been laying up in bed, thinking of people trying to break into the window, and just
Paranoia.
things that, major paranoia, and just wanting to end my life on multiple occasions. It's just the dark, lonely place of addiction. And it's interesting because what people see from the outside and what people see from the inside are two, or what's going on the inside, should I say, is two very different things normally. And a lot of people would see a very bubbly, outgoing, lively personality, because that was ultimately the mask that I put on for people to see. But actually experiencing what life was like from the inside, it was a very, very different picture.
So true. People can have such a different view of what life's like from the outside versus the inside, but part of that is because we work pretty fucking hard to create that image of that we're still surviving and okay. And so to talk us through, I completely resonate with the rock bottoms, and what was the process of going, hey, I need help? You talked about rehab. Did somebody highlight that this was a problem to you? Did it just get so low and you had enough sort of suicidal ideation or thoughts that you thought, I've got to figure this out? Like, how did you get onto the road of recovery?
So I tried giving up hundreds of times,
sure.
Over the years, and I knew it was a major problem for a long time. Did you have like jobs, or were you kind of on the street? Like, what was your actual circumstances? Because people can have these addictions and still lead perfectly normal on the outside lives. Yeah, I mean, I started work when I was about 17 or 18, and I've had numerous jobs. I mean, keeping jobs for a long period of time was hard work for me for obvious reasons. I've run numerous businesses over the years, all of which failed because trying to run a successful business is hard enough on its own, let alone trying to do it when you've got a major drug problem.
Right.
So I joke that I've had every job under the sun, from being a white van driver to IT to recruitment to sales, and everything in between almost. Sure. Because my stints within work were very short. So that's really how it happened. With regards to how I got onto the road to recovery, the first rehab was suggested by my parents, and as I say, I spent 12 weeks saying virtually zero in our actual counselling session. Pretty much as soon as I got out, the first day that I got out from those 12 weeks of rehab, I started drinking straight away. Right. I wasn't ready, and ultimately that's the most important part of wanting to change anything in your life, whether it be addiction or anything else. If you've got to want it internally. So through that experience, moving forward from that experience, drug taking got worse and worse and worse, and it was only 6 years ago, this June, in fact, that I spoke to someone after doing some self-development courses, and what really struck home was how bad it really got, how much of an impact it was having on my life, the people in my life. And from that was the catalyst to wanting to take action. And then I actually went and saw Peter Davies, who's a drug addiction specialist in Guildford for addiction care, and he was the person and his team that basically got me back on the straight and narrow. I spent 2 weeks there, and it was the first 3 steps of the 12-step program, which I don't actually follow anymore, but those 3 steps really brought it home to me that I couldn't manage. I was out of my control, and things needed to change. And from that moment on, I didn't touch a drink or do any drugs ever again.
So why was this time different than the hundreds of other times that you'd tried to give up?
It's a great question, and the simple answer is it needed to be done. In my head, I could see how bad it got. And addiction, I liken it to almost like a fog that surrounds you and blocks you from being able to see the reality of life in many ways, with it being either seeing the damage that you're doing to yourself both physically and mentally, or the damage that you're doing to relationships and the people that you love. And the conversations that I had through self-development and doing the first three steps of the 12-step program sort of lifted that veil of fog, if you like, to be able to see the harsh reality of what was going on. So, like I said, just sort of, a little bit earlier in this conversation, you've got to want to do it inside your head. And I see a lot of people these days, and I was there for a long time, saying, yeah, I want to give up, but actually the real want inside wasn't, that switch wasn't clicked. You weren't able to see, or I wasn't able to see the true damage that was actually happening to my life.
And we often need somebody to hold that mirror up. It's a funny thing because it's so different for all of us to see the impact on family and friends. It's almost like we don't want to believe that we are the source of some of that. But when we can see it, so many people don't ever get it, though. So it's amazing when people do. So I'm curious about the 12-step program. And of course, I'm super curious about the fact that you don't do 12 steps anymore, because neither do I. And that's like sacrilegious to people who are in sort of the AAs and the NAs and all of that. Like, that is the truth and the life and the only way, right?
It can be, yeah.
It can be. And I have great gratitude to AA programs and the people within them for getting me on the road to recovery. I have the dearest, deepest friendships with some people from that sort of time. Just because I was at the lowest, darkest depths of horrific, suicidal ideation and putting my kids in danger and that sort of thing. However, I've learned that there are other ways that we can look after ourselves when we understand what's going on for us and learn to look after our minds as well as our bodies. So I'm curious about that recovery process for you, because I found the first few years into recovery probably the hardest of my life.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So here's what I'd say about the 12-step program. Whatever works for you is the best way.
Yes.
Right.
Do it.
So, yeah, absolutely. I know lots of people who, to this day, after 12 years and more, spend time at AA and follow the 12-step program and do all that it offers. And swear by it, and absolutely they get great things from it. And no doubt that it was the catalyst for me and the stepping stone, just like it sounds like it was for you, to getting on the road to recovery. So absolutely. I am incredibly grateful for it being there as an organisation and as a structure. The reason I don't continue down the route of the 12-step, there's a few reasons, but one of the reasons, whenever you go to a meeting, the first thing that you say whenever you speak is, "Hi, my name's Nick, I'm an alcoholic or I'm an addict." Yeah. And for me, what you create yourself as in the moment and what future you're creating is very important. So if you're going into, the mindset is, right, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, and you're repeating that on a regular basis and telling yourself that I'm an alcoholic and I'm an addict. For me, that didn't work, because I don't view myself as an alcoholic or an addict anymore. I don't want to live in that version of me. I live in a very different version of me. So moving forward, it didn't work for me to be reprogramming my brain to reconfirming that was the problem that I had. And who you spend time with is incredibly important. And I just, it just didn't work for me moving forward. I actually got much greater self-awareness, which I think a lot of the progress that one can make through addiction and through life in general comes from. Through self-development courses, through books, through other people and experiences and that side of things. So it's been a constant development. It wasn't a case of doing the first 3 steps and then everything was rosy and
of course
I didn't need to do any sort of self-work moving forward. Quite the opposite. Every day I spend time doing work on myself in one way or another. Meditation has played a huge part, especially over the last year. Doing Dr. Joe Dispenza's meditations have played a very pivotal role in.
What's it done for you?
Dr. Joe Dispenza's work has rewired my brain in a lot of ways, has given me a much more positive internal dialogue, which is critical. And it's enabled me to deal with stressful situations way better. So I think meditation really should be taught. One of those subjects should be taught at school from a very young age. The benefits are untold. I meditate for an hour every day.
For an hour?
Yes, I know. It sounds crazy.
It sounds incredible, because I feel like that's the most challenging thing to do for an addict or an alcoholic, is to get out of your head, right, and into your body and connecting with the present, so that you can actually connect with people in a healthy sort of way. I still can't do that sort of long. But anyway, everybody's journey is personal, right, and their own. So incredible that's the practice that you've incorporated in order to keep you sort of on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Diet is absolutely critical. For example, the biggest thing I had a problem with after giving up was giving up sugar. And recently I slipped back into some habits around sugar, which was a wonderful reminder, a stark awakening of how important it is to be eating, a diet with real food, and what difference that makes to internal dialogues, to anxiety levels, to stress levels, to energy levels, to all sorts of things, which is why it's such an important aspect within my coaching, for sure.
Please, I've got to pause you, because I said I always learn the thing I need to learn, and sugar is one of the things at the moment, as I change my career again and evolve again, that is sort of the secret shame thing that every once in a while I'll turn to. So how did you give up sugar? And this is me just on a personal curiosity rampage.
Well, recently, I've got a Facebook group which is a part of a paid community, which we do monthly challenges, and basically we did a 10-day sugar detox, which with a friend of mine, Laura Bolton, who's an incredible woman, who's got incredible knowledge around sugar and detoxing from it and all those sorts of things. We formulated a plan. So I think, like anything, when you want to give up, being part of a strong community of people that are on the same journey is incredibly important. Having that support structure is incredibly important. And then having guidance around what you can and can't do, and having recipes in place. Like anything, it's about having a look at the situation, having a look at the pitfalls, the things that cause the problems, i.e., snacking, or what to eat when you go out, or, whatever it is for that particular thing that you're trying to deal with, and then putting strategies in place to plug those holes to give you the best chance to survive, to work through the initial period, because it's 10 days that sugar really you want to try and get out of your system. And the problem is it's everywhere, right?
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Nutrition,
and in everything almost.
Yeah, exactly. So it's challenging. It's one of the most difficult things to do, especially if you have a brain that's wired to to enjoy the addictive tendencies and the dopamine fixes you get from it. So.
Because I guess the tricky thing is always things that you need balance with, at least for me. So when I gave up alcohol and put some other things in place, it's like I got rid of the inner dialogue of, okay, I'm going to the pub with some mates. Should I, shouldn't I? How much? What kind? That whole back and forth. And then inevitably, with a little bit of peer pressure, you go back in, right? But with something like sugar, occasionally I find it healthy and nice to have a lovely dessert after a meal, right? And so it's thinking, okay, but that means that I can't just shut off the inner dialogue completely and just never consider it. Occasionally I want to consider it. So it becomes like I've got to create the balance rather than just the black and white, I don't do that anymore kind of thinking. So it's like, do you have to give it up completely?
It's a really interesting conversation, and one that has been bouncing around my brain very recently, actually. Do I have the same approach to drugs as I do to sugar, i.e., as you say, zero tolerance, and go down that route? And actually, in some ways, my brain is telling me that maybe I should go down that route, because ultimately, like we said at the beginning of this conversation before we pressed record, one of the key things that I'm very sure on is I need to practice what I preach. Yeah. I don't want to be someone who says, yeah, you need to not eat sugar, or you need to do this or that, or whatever advice that I'm giving at the time, but then secretly behind closed doors I'm doing it myself. And,
absolutely.
And as I say, I will always put my hand up and say, do you know what? I'm not following my advice at the moment, and I have fallen off the wagon, so to speak. And sugar recently was one of those things for me. And instead of trying to hide that from people, within the group, with the start of the detox challenge, say, look, hands up, I have recently slipped on some of the habits, and I'm now dealing with it. And I think it's really important to have that transparency, because I see it a lot these days with people sort of. It comes across incongruent because they're saying one thing, but actually, you do a little bit of digging and they're doing something quite different.
People can see right through it.
I think so. I think most people can, yeah. So to answer your question, I don't know is the answer whether sugar should be, you know what I mean? I don't know whether there is black and white. All I do know is that I am way happier, more productive, have much more energy, have a better inner dialogue, and all the things that come with it when I'm away from eating rubbish food.
And I know those things about myself too,
Yeah. And I think, actually out of all the things that are addictive, and some people find it very easy to pick up and put down sugar, but it's the same with drugs and alcohol as well. But if you're someone that does have difficulty with it, it's because there's no stigma attached to it, really. It's not like you're smoking a cigarette in front of someone and wafting smoke in front of their face when you're eating a dessert. It's accepted, it's normal. In actual fact, if you say no to a dessert, a lot of the times it's sort of people are looking at you saying, "Oh, why not?" And then there's that sort of classic peer pressure, conversation again. So always. I think the problem with it is it's everywhere. It's all pervasive, and it's normal.
And I think it can be that scarcity mindset for me where I'm like, well, I've already had to give up alcohol to keep people safe and to stay alive, Do I also, surely I can treat myself with sugar from time to time, right? Because it's less sort of dangerous on the outside. And I think that's a mindset shift that I want to make is very much, what are all the benefits that you just described of giving up sugar? It's about how can I think clearly, how can I, have less anxiety, be more confident, live my purpose, coming at it from that place. It feels more like it's about success, achievement, mental health, well-being, all that sort of stuff. Then you're looking at the gains rather than the losses.
Absolutely. Like I alluded to earlier in the conversation, it's about finding strategies to better help combat with these certain situations. So, for example, within the community that I've created, I'm going to be doing a whole lot of live cookery videos and tips and tricks and strategies around sugar and having a normal diet. Well, not normal diet, we've got a normal diet compared to what most people have normally.
Yeah, a healthy diet.
Yeah, exactly. So it's finding those strategies. For example, Laura, my friend, has a grain-free, sugar-free, dairy-free carrot cake, which is supposed to be delicious. I'm still yet to try it, but do you see what I mean? There's loads of options out there. So rather than having an option which is just full of sugar and it's going to cause all sorts of biological and mental problems, you can have something else instead. So I'm really looking forward to launching that part of the community and getting just ready for myself, if anything else.
I know, right?
This is ultimately everything I do is about me.
Yeah, totally.
It's about this experiment on Nick Elvery and where can I take myself, and then it's about sharing that information with my clients and the people in the community and the people around me.
100%. I have these conversations because I'm fascinated about what people do to look after themselves and what they've gone through and how they achieve now, and I learn something from it, and hopefully other people do as well. What other routines or habits do you try to put in your life to allow yourself to be as successful and productive as you are?
Oh, lots. Okay. So
give us a flavour.
So it's snowing in the UK right now.
Yes, it is.
So cold thermogenesis is something that I've been doing a lot of experimentation with recently, and that simply means exposing yourself to cold environments, whether that's a short cold shower, an ice bath, standing out with little clothing in snowy or cold weather.
Are you the one outside in your pants right now?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. There is a picture of me on Facebook somewhere with me doing that. But so cold thermogenesis, having some exposure to cold every day is a really, really good thing. And that could easily be in the form of a cold shower at the end of a warm shower.
Why is it good? What does it do for you?
very good for your immune system. Very good for it's just so I look at a body as an electromagnet is effectively what a human being is, right?
Yeah.
And having exposure to cold, just like a magnet, it gets more efficient when it gets cold. That's the sort of way I view it, at least. And cold, light are two things, and I'll get onto the light in a minute, which are really not looked at very much, or at least as people are starting to look at, but there's huge benefits from it. So without getting into too much geeky technical side of things, exposing yourself to cold, having the right sorts of light. So I use red light therapy in the morning for 10 minutes. So I use a specific type of red light, which is very good for your skin, but it's also good for firing up the mitochondria. So just like cold thermogenesis, the mitochondria are basically bacteria in your body which help produce power. They create something called ATP, which is what gives us energy. Okay, so doing these things like cold exposure, red light therapy, eating the right sorts of diet, all have a very positive impact, if done correctly, on the mitochondria and the energy systems within your body. Okay. So I do a lot of that. I do red light therapy. I do that. I do an hour's meditation. I've actually switched to doing an hour's meditation in the evening. Just, again, experimentation to see what works best for me. But I used to do that in the morning. So meditation, red light. I'm a massive fan of Bulletproof Coffee, which is...
I know it well. Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Explain. Okay. But explain for our listeners, because they probably don't.
So it sounds like the most bizarre thing ever, but effectively it's coffee, butter, and for all intents and purposes, coconut oil, all blended up.
It does sound horrific.
It sounds horrific, but it's absolutely delicious. If you're someone who likes a latte or something like that as normal coffee, then it's amazing. But the beautiful thing is, it's one of the things that I think works very well for dealing with sugar is to increase your fat content within your food. And this is a really good way of doing that first thing in the morning. And it turns the brain on. It helps the hormones start to balance back out. It's just
and you
incredible.
Don't get the shakes like you do with too much coffee.
Exactly.
Which is insane. But for listeners, they're like, what the hell are you thinking? You're putting butter in your body.
I mean, that's a conversation again, because there's some people think dairy is a disaster, and actually milk can be considered a disaster. So I mean, that's a different conversation altogether. But I would just say, look, try it. If you're someone that doesn't have an issue with dairy, obviously, if you have an issue with dairy, which actually quite a lot of people do these days, then obviously that's not the way to do it, and you can just have it with coconut oil if you like, or almond milk or something. There are loads of different variations of it, but I would say just suck it and see, have a go with it, because it's a game changer. It's so easy to make, and it sets you up lovely for the day.
Bulletproof coffee. Okay, what else?
So reading is a big part of my life. I actually go in stages and cycles with it. Sometimes I'm really keen on doing it every day, and then sometimes I'm not, but I'm just looking at my bookshelf in front of me, and it's got all sorts of books ranging from personal development, NLP, to how to sleep better, autobiographies. I love reading
an autobiography,
I love reading about people that have just created incredible lives and being inspired by that. One of my favourites actually is Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall. I don't know why, but that was incredible.
Lovely.
So
old school reading.
Old school reading. I don't like a Kindle. I like a real book.
What about an audiobook?
I love an audiobook. So I'll be listening to podcasts every day, pretty much. So when I'm standing in front of my red light therapy device, I will be listening to podcasts then. Whenever I'm in the car, if I'm not listening to music, I'm listening to podcasts.
And so what I'm hearing is that you have things that, routines that you put in place to replace maybe negative dialogue that used to be there with education, with positive dialogue, with new information, with ideas for experimenting, so that you're consciously making an effort to replace what is in your brain and your body with the kind of unconscious state that you were in before.
100%. And that's effectively what it's all about in my book, right? So Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about we have anywhere between 50 and 80,000 thoughts a day, okay? And the majority of those thoughts are the same as yesterday, which tells me that
you're just on a repeat cycle.
Yeah, exactly. So if you believe that your thoughts create your reality, which I do, then what you're saying is it's just going to continue, and expecting any form of change within your life, any dramatic change, is not going to happen if you're just thinking the same things and having the same conversations in your head and being the same way as you were yesterday.
It's just so simple if you think about it.
It is so simple, but the problem is these thought processes, habits, behaviors, the connections in our brain, which fundamentally is what it's all about, have been practiced over and over and over and over again, subconsciously, without any awareness to it most of the time. And to actually depict those and create a new way of being takes it's consistent practice, which is why I've got the word consistency taped on my shelf in front of my face every day, because it's one of my favorite words, that and tenacity. So it's like when you go to the gym, you don't just go to the gym, lift one weight and get a hench. You have to go in day after day, or at least consistently, each week to get the results that you want. And it's
especially
the same
if you're training for like a fight or a big event or a marathon or a race. Like you got to train 6 months, a year beforehand. That's the kind of level of sustained focus that somebody needs. So translating that to your mindset, that's how we've got to look at it.
It's a beautiful way of looking at it, and that's exactly it. It is, you're training for something. You're training your brain to react in a different way, to react to stressful situations in a different way, and that's one of the big things that's changed for me over the years. It's still not perfect, it's a work in progress for sure, but being able to firstly be aware of what's going on. Without awareness, nothing can change. When you're aware of what the current patterns are, then you can say, right, well, actually, do I want to have that pattern, or do I want to change it for something else? And once you understand what it is that you want to create moving forward, then it's a case of looking at the habit loops that happen, being aware of when those conversations or things happen in your brain, and then putting a stop to it right then and there, and then putting a new cassette in. I think I liken it to when we grow up, we have like a cassette in our mind that's the record button has been pressed, and in our early years of our life, through experiences and things that people that we model and things that we like and dislike and all the things that happen to us, it's recording and recording and recording. And then as we get into our later on in our life, that stops recording so much and starts to play just on repeat over and over and over again. And effectively what I've done with my life and what you've done with yours and what I work with my clients is to say, right, well, let's have a little look at that tape. Let's have a little listen to what's actually on that tape right now, and then decide, well, do I actually want some of that? Because some of it might be really beneficial and really positive. And then having a look at, well, what else do I actually want to remove or put in place? And then it's, through meditation, through subconscious training and all the other things that I teach, it's about reprogramming that. And that takes time. And that's where the difficulty lies, because
it's huge.
Change is easy in the idea of it, like what you have to do,
right? Theoretically,
the theory of it is you just have to, just like the theory of giving up drugs is easy.
It's just so
you just
simple.
have to make sure
just put
that
it down.
Just don't ever take a drug again. Just one thing that you've got to do, right? Simple. It's really easy in theory, but the practice is hard because it takes dedication, it takes commitment, which is why
you've got to face up to difficult situations that you used to numb out or escape from. And that's fucking hard, because life has challenges and you can't just run away from them anymore. And that takes sustained, bravery and courage training in order to face up to it. That's like the flip side of just giving up the alcohol, is that now you have no skin and you feel everything like times 10, Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and that's it. And that's why when I work with clients, I always ask them a series of questions before we even, start working with each other. And one of the questions is like, why do you want this?
Why the fuck are you here?
Like what do you want to achieve and why? Why is it important to you? And when you start digging a little bit deeper, a lot of the times it's superficial. Like when I used to run a weight loss business, for example, a lot of the time they say, well, why do you want to lose weight? And what people would normally say, the first one or two answers is not normally what's really going on. It's normally a bit deeper than that. Yeah. And it's only when you get to that deeper understanding that you understand whether someone's truly committed or not.
Now, I want to pause you because we've focused a bit on the addiction and the recovery, But there's this other thread of, losing your father, watching him deteriorate, and just the timeline around him passing away, I think you said, and that being, was it a catalyst or just coincidental that was the time that you began your recovery journey? I'm just curious about what that period of time was like.
Yeah, so it was really hard, that whole experience. Throughout my addiction, I spent a lot of time at home. And obviously, I moved out and went to live other places, and I've travelled the world and I've done other things. But actually, I spent more time at home than most people did and do, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I was very much in that environment. And it wasn't just watching my dad go through what he did. It's watching the effect it had on my family and my mum specifically.
Of course.
And that's what really got to me, was not only watching my dad, who was incredible. He was a top salesman in the world for what he did. He was an electrical engineer. He, almost single-handedly built our first house, did all the wiring and plumbing. He was just a really incredible guy. Like me, he was just fascinated with how things worked. His was more about how mechanical and electrical things work. Yeah, rather than, I still have some of that side to me, but I'm more sort of in tune with the humanity side of things. So watching him go from being that person to literally not being able to fend for himself was difficult enough as it is, but then watching the stress that was piled onto my mum and seeing the fact that her life had to change, just like people say when you have a child, which I haven't had yet, but when you have a child, your whole life changes and you devote your entire time and life to them. It felt very much like that. My mum's life, her social life, and my dad's for that matter, almost disappeared. And it was just a case of spending time looking after dad, and my mum devoting. We were very lucky in respect that we had nurses to help us with certain aspects of it, which was incredible, and I'm very, very grateful for. But still didn't take away the stress of watching, my dad and ultimately my mum's husband deteriorate and then eventually pass away. Credit to my dad, he had a sense of humour to the last day that he was with us, and the strength that he showed and demonstrated throughout the period of time of what he went through. I don't know if I would ever be able to manage it quite like he did.
But there was something about noticing what your mum was going through that pain, and that I guess you may have been causing her pain simultaneously through your addictive patterns and behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's something that I've reflected on over the years often, as you can probably appreciate. The fact that, she was going through all of the stress that she had with my dad and with me on top. And she went through her own personal health challenges as well. So it's been a trying time, and I have the greatest respect for my mother ever. What she's been through and how she carries herself these days, and throughout the whole time, is just total testament to her character and what she's managed to achieve and who she is. So it's I think that was one of the hardest parts for me to get over, was the fact of how much of an idiot I was and how much pain I caused, her over the years. And that's obviously conversations that her and I have had, subsequently giving up everything, and we put a lot of that to bed. And actually our relationship is the best it's ever been now.
I bet she's pretty proud of you.
Yeah, very much.
And I can't imagine what it's like to be going through recovery and grief at the same time, talking about your skin being removed and feeling everything and needing to face up to yourself and the world, as well as the sort of pain of losing your dad. It sounds unimaginable. Yeah,
it was challenging. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, undoubtedly. Going through all of that, watching my dad, deteriorate and then eventually pass away at the same time was hard work. I can't imagine what it was like for Mum as well. She must have gone through the horrific losing her husband, and then when you come out of addiction, it's not just everything, right, we've just given up drugs and alcohol, everything's rosy. Far from it. You then have
you realize how shit your life is, that you have to build it up from like the depths of nothing, and you're like, fuck, other people have built a life, I have nothing.
Yeah, which was one of the hard things to come across, because I'm a very driven guy, and I had all these big aspirations for what I wanted to achieve in my life. And coming out of 12 years of or thereabouts worth of addiction, and watching loads of other people either having built businesses or got families, or in their career that they're enjoying, or whatever it was, that was actually quite hard for me, because I've tried to build 5 to 6 businesses throughout that period of addiction, and all of them failed. Coming out the other side of that and sort of watching everyone else's, what looked like everyone else's lives looking great, and then me almost starting not only from zero, almost felt like sort of -10.
-10. Yeah. Do you think you would have gotten clean and sober if your dad wasn't ill?
That's an interesting question that I've never been asked. Do I think that I would have got clean and sober if my dad had never been ill?
Like, would you have needed to?
I don't know. That's a great question. One that's definitely going to be thought about after this podcast. That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I said earlier, I think my dad's illness was definitely, let's put it this way, I used my dad's illness as an excuse to do more drugs and get deeper into that world. It's probably a fairer way of putting it, rather than saying it caused me to, it's important to take responsibility and ownership of things in our lives. I don't know is the answer, but thank you for that question, because it's something that I'm definitely going to have a think about for sure.
And I guess it's my curiosity around whether the adversity that we do face outside of us or internally can actually be the gift, be the blessing that allows us to achieve and create the ripple effect of impact on so many people's lives. As you said at the beginning, being even grateful for your addiction and for some of the things that you've gone through, and that seems like an important piece of the puzzle.
Very much so.
Nick, I feel like we could talk all day. This is fascinating. If people want to work with you or connect with you, where can they find you?
So there's 2 places. Head over to nickelry.com. That gives you a little bit more of an insight into my private coaching practice. So I work with entrepreneurs. So if you do want to have a conversation with me, I do free 60-minute calls with people. So you can just go to nickelry.com and click book a call and choose a date that works for you, and we can have a conversation around whether we're a suitable fit. But I've also got the Daily Habits podcast, which I'm really enjoying, which is basically dailyhabits.co.uk. Just head over there and you can see the current episodes that I have. And the other thing is the community, the empowered entrepreneurs community that I'm creating at the moment. As I said to you a little bit earlier in the call, it's about really imparting the knowledge that I've learned over the years from biohacking and all the stuff that we talk about, rituals and nutrition, exercise and all those things, and putting it in a format that helps people in a community setting. So we do monthly challenges, as I said to you earlier. We do the sugar detox one at the moment, and there's a whole plethora of other things. So if you are interested in that, head over to dailyhabits.co.uk, and there's a little icon that says the Empowered Entrepreneurs, and that'll take you to a page to give you more information. It's you can try it for 30 days for £1. And if it's your thing, it's £30 a month thereafter. And if it's not, then there's no contract or commitment. You can just say it's not your thing and leave. So entirely up to you.
Sounds amazing. There is literally nothing like community to help you change a habit. I think the power of any kind of support groups around addiction is the community element, the accountability element of other people being in a similar situation but looking after you. I will be subscribing to that podcast today, immediately. Love it. And we'll add all of those sort of links into the notes from the podcast. Nick, thank you so much for being so open, for your bravery. I love stories like this because I resonate with them so much, and I know how, I can feel how hard the journey was, even though you're at the top of your game, it sounds like right now. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Petra, for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening. If something helped you today, please do share this episode with a friend and let them know that they are not alone. I know that for me, isolation kept me stuck much longer than I needed to be. So let's practice courage and talk to someone about what's going on, as that's the first step to making life amazing. Check out my website, petravelzeboer.com, for your free Kickstarter plan, which will teach you to turn your biggest weaknesses into your greatest strengths. Join the community of people who are changing the way they view life's challenges and living life to the full. Until next time, goodbye.